Hey friends, if you're looking to watch the super hit American romantic comedy Your Cordially Invited movie in English, make sure to like this video. And if you're new to our channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. In today's video, we're diving into the movie Love at First Sight. I'll be sharing everything you need to know about the film, including where you can watch it. We'll also go over some interesting facts about the movie, its technical aspects, music, pre-production, filming, and post-production details. I'll give you the scoop on the budget, box office performance, and much more. Of course, we'll discuss the movie's storyline in detail, and I'll even give you my thoughts on the plot and a mini-review. Plus, we'll be talking about the star cast, the performances of the actors, and which character is played by whom. So make sure to stick around till the end of the video for all the details. Let's get started. You're Cordially Invited is a 2025 American romantic comedy film written and directed by Stoller for Amazon MGM Studios. The stars Will Ferrell and Reese Witherspoon. The film was released on Amazon Prime Video on January 30th, 2025. Plot. Over-attentive single father Jim is shocked to hear that his daughter, Jenny, has gotten engaged to her boyfriend Oliver. Jim calls to book the small inn on Palmetto Island, Georgia, the same place where Jim and Jenny's mother were married before her death from cancer. The owner, Scarlett, accepts his reservation for June 1st, but abruptly dies before she can fill out the booking on the inn's calendar. Meanwhile, television producer Margot finds out that her sister Neve plans to marry her boyfriend Dixon, an exotic dancer. She also volunteers to plan the wedding, also booking Palmetto Island, where she and Neve visited their grandmother as children. Leslie, Palmetto House's new manager, takes their booking for June 1st, unaware of the previous booking. On the weekend of the weddings, both parties arrive and discover the double booking. Since the island is too small to accommodate two weddings, Margot initially claims the venue for Neve and Dixon, but they later agree to share the island by alternating between indoor and outdoor events. Neve reveals to Margot that she is pregnant, but asks her to keep it a secret to avoid upsetting their traditional mother Flora. At the rehearsal dinners, both parties are forced inside by a rainstorm. Jim charms Margot's siblings and mother, frustrating Margot, who has a strained relationship with her family. Jim and Jenny perform Islands in the Stream together, disturbing Margot with the sexual undertones of the song. Afterwards, Margot makes a drunken toast. When Jim attempts to take the microphone from her, she accidentally hits Jenny in the face with it. In the morning, Jim overhears Margot criticizing Jenny's appearance and her closeness with her dad to her family, who defend Jim. As an act of revenge, he intentionally draws out Jenny and Oliver's ceremony so that Neve and Dixon will not be able to marry at sunset, then enlists a boat to drive past the dock where their ceremony is taking place to splash the wedding party. On a second pass, the dock collapses, dropping the family into the water. Jim and Margot meet up later in the evening, where Margot apologizes to Jim, only for him to guiltily admit to his revenge plans. A furious Margot enlists her siblings to ruin Jenny and Oliver's reception by destroying their wedding cake. Afterward, they have a heartfelt conversation, where each of them open up about their life problems. While they are talking, they see someone who appears to be Oliver outside the hotel kissing a bridesmaid. Margot tells Jim, who is dubious. After finding out from Oliver that he and Jenny are planning to move from Atlanta to Memphis and had been hiding it from Jim, however, he reveals the information, but implies that he witnessed the moment himself. A furious Jenny begins kissing other attendees at random, leading Oliver to do the same with a bridesmaid. Amid the chaos, it is revealed that the person Margot saw was one of Oliver's groomsmen. Jenny angrily leaves Jim and the island behind, while Neve and Dixon complete their interrupted ceremony. At the reception, Margot fights with her mother over her emotional unavailability, revealing her siblings' secrets in the process, while her family criticizes her for being distant from them. When Margot returns to her room, Jim is waiting with an alligator, which bites her before he throws it out of the hotel window. Dixon treats the injury and Margot reconciles with her family and with Jim. When Jim discovers through social media that Jenny and Oliver have annulled their marriage, he gets a ride with Margot back to Atlanta to try to convince her to go through with the marriage. He and Jenny have a heart-to-heart, agreeing not to lie to each other anymore. She and Oliver decide not to get remarried, but still plan to move to Memphis together and remain a couple. Afterwards, Jenny reveals to Margot that Jim is romantically interested in her. The two make plans to see each other again and share a kiss before Margot returns home. The following Thanksgiving, Margot's family, along with Jim, Jenny, and Oliver, visit her in Los Angeles and take a family photo together. Jim proposes to Margot, who instead suggests that they elope in order to avoid another wedding fiasco. Cast: * Will Ferrell as Jim, Jenny's father. * Reese Witherspoon as Margot, a wedding planner and Neve's older sister. * Geraldine Viswanathan as Jenny, a bride and Jim's daughter. * Meredith Hagner as Neve, a bride and Margot's younger sister. * Stony Blyden as Oliver. * Leon Morgan as Gwyneth. * Rory Scovel as Colton. * Kayla Monteroso Mejia as Heather. * Ramona Young as Kelly. * Jack McBrayer as Leslie. * Fortune Feimster as Captain Barry. * Celia Weston as Flora. * Bobby Moynihan as himself. * Wyatt Russell as masked dancer host. * Jimmy Tatro as Dixon. * Vinnie Thomas as Davy. * Peyton Manning as himself. * Lauren Holt as Abigail. * Wesley Mann as Pastor Jerry. * Nick Jonas as Pastor Luther. Production: Nicholas Stoller wrote, directed, and produced the film, while Will Ferrell and Reese Witherspoon starred and serve as producers alongside Jessica Elbaum, Connor Welch, and Lauren Neustadter. Serving as executive producers are Ashley Strumwasser and Alex Brown. Production companies are Stoller Global Solutions, Gloria Sanchez Productions, and Hello Sunshine. The project landed at Amazon Studios in July 2022. Ferrell and Witherspoon were revealed to be attached to the project in June 2022. Release: You're Cordially Invited was released worldwide on Amazon Prime Video on January 30, 2025. Principal photography began in Atlanta in May 2023. Reception: On the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, 47% of 73 critics' reviews are positive, with an average rating of 5.3/10. The website's consensus reads, while Will Ferrell and Reese Witherspoon work well together as catty combatants, tired set pieces and a misjudged romantic subplot make this an invitation you can file under maybe. Metacritic, which uses a weighted average, assigned the film a score of 52 out of 100, based on 25 critics, indicating mixed or average reviews. Matt Zoller Sites of RogerEbert.com gave the film 2.5 out of 4 stars and wrote, Will Ferrell and Reese Witherspoon have both been around long enough to have become the movie star equivalent of comfort food. By this point in their respective careers, you know what you're getting, especially if the project is a comedy, and if you like it, it'll fill you up for a couple of hours. You're Cordially Invited is reheated comedy leftovers, for the most part, but there's enough warmth, sentimentality, and belly laughs to make for a raucous time waster. Even though the moment was inevitable, I winced when Will Ferrell and Reese Witherspoon finally locked lips in You're Cordially Invited. The nuptial movie from writer-director Nicholas Stoller represents the stars' first team-up, though the revelation that they've never worked together before is more of a, yeah, that makes sense, fact than a, how is that possible one. Ferrell is King Galumph, best at working on a broad scale as genial doofuses, heroic fools, and oblivious bloviators, while Witherspoon's a diminutive spitfire whose characters insist on a more grounded context for their, deserved or ruthless, triumphs over their doubters. They're both wildly gifted funny people, but they don't frequent the same planes of comedy, and in You're Cordially Invited, streaming on Amazon Prime, they're less co-stars than the leads of two movies that occasionally intersect. It's unfortunate that the plot turn welding those two pictures together requires their stars to do impressions of people who are attracted to one another. They're not drawn together, but the opposite, like magnets whose poles are aligned. Their energy is such that they seem like they should repel one another whenever close. That cursory kiss isn't just lacking all conviction, it feels like it should result in the actors rebounding violently toward opposite sides of the screen. Thankfully, the romantic aspects of You're Cordially Invited are deployed sparingly and mostly toward the end, as though Margot, the reality TV executive played by Witherspoon, and Jim, the widowed father played by Ferrell, only get together because they're single and it's last call, no judgment. Relationships have started from less Stoller built his career on what I think of as comroms movies, from Forgetting Sarah Marshall to the 5-Year Engagement to Brothers, that foreground the laughs and riff on the expected rhythms of the romantic comedy while nevertheless finding their way to a heartfelt finale. You're Cordially Invited might have been better off ditching the rom of it all entirely, but Stoller is good enough at this that even if the rest of his movie consists of two slightly discordant halves, both are pretty solid. Ferrell's Fraction is a father-daughter lark about a disturbingly devoted parent shaken by the prospect of his only child leaving him for a life of her own with the college boyfriend she's rushing to wed. Witherspoon's is a family reunion dramedy about a successful career woman who regresses to a defensive teenager in the company of the button-down Atlantican she's mostly estranged from. When a reservation mishap leads to Jim's daughter, Jenny, Geraldine Viswanathan, and Margot's sister, Neve, Meredith Hagner, being double-booked to marry at the same small island in over the same weekend, Jim and Margot channel their anxieties into what escalates into a nuptial war. I was expecting You're Cordially Invited to be better with Jim, who's another of the good-natured, emotionally eruptive men that Stoller's populated so many of his movies with, but it's actually Margot and her family who come into sharper focus. The LA-based Margot sees herself as a refugee from a culture of snobbery and conservatism, with Neve as her only ally among a group of people who judge her for making different choices. And yet, the more we get to see her dynamic with her loved one, especially her razor blades dipped in honey mother, Celia Weston, the less clear it is who pushed who away. Margot's family members may keep secrets and like to tuck criticisms into mild observations, but Margot's embrace of radical honesty, which gets linked to her work in ways I wish we saw more of, is in certain lights just another, more direct form of being mean. Margot's straight-laced family, enforcers of white Southern respectability, are funnier than the rival wedding party, mostly because they're allowed to be more specific, while Jenny, her DJing fiancé, and their friends and loved ones end up feeling defined by the contrast they provide, as a multiracial, rambunctious, white claw and cornhole-loving crew. That said, Kayla Monterroso Mejia, who a few weeks ago played a scene-stealing payday loan officer in One of Them Days, is once again a standout as Jenny's overly protective, hard-partying maid of honor. But You're Cordially Invited never really puts its arsenal of tropes to good use as it relies on silly humor. The film's idea of comedy is dunking a group of people into a lake, making a dad and daughter perform a song with sexual undertones, and making a character wrestle an alligator. The unintentional humor when the film finally concentrates on its core conflict does not help much either. There's a scene where Jim overhears Margot trash-talking him and he moves from a well-lit corridor into darkness to show us that things will go south. You're Cordially Invited aims to be a lighthearted comedy of two families with unique perspectives on love and family bonds, fighting for common ground, quite literally. But despite some wonderful performances from Witherspoon and Ferrell in their unrestrained best, the film fails to do justice to its genre. You're Cordially Invited tries to be a funny, laid-back watch, but for a film about not one but two weddings, there are no better halves in this rom-com. You're Cordially Invited is currently streaming on Prime Video. It's a sign of the times that a good old-fashioned date movie featuring two of the most bankable movie stars of the early aughts, Reese Witherspoon and Will Ferrell, is bypassing theaters altogether in early 2025. When it comes to writer-director Nicholas Stoller's latest rom-com, if that's the word for a film where two adults set out to sabotage one another's wedding plans, You're Cordially Invited to watch You're Cordially Invited at home. The Prime release should play great at any scale while its stars are crossed at one another, but miscalculates their chemistry in a gratuitous and slightly icky epilogue. As Jim, Ferrell is the first to be introduced, fussing over his Gen Z daughter, Jenny, Geraldine Viswanathan, who disturbs the balance with her widower dad when she announces she's engaged to Stony Blyden's one-dimensional Oliver. The grooms-to-be can't be too memorable, or they'd pull focus from the adults. Ever since Jenny's mom died, Jim has pinned all his happiness on her feelings, and when it comes time for his only child to get married, he wants everything to be perfect. So he calls the Palmetto House, the island resort where he and his late wife tied the knot, and books the venue. For her part, Witherspoon is back in Sweet Home Alabama mode, assuming that character had never gotten hitched in the first place. She plays Margot, a high-strung Los Angeles TV producer who's cut off nearly all contact with her judgmental Georgia family, apart from her younger sister, Neve, Meredith Hagner, who's madly in love with a devoted but dense Chippendales dancer, Jimmy Tatro. Nev's situation, plus the news that she's pregnant, brings out Margot's protective instinct, and she immediately switches into wedding planner mode, promising her sister an unforgettable ceremony. There's just one problem. The idyllic island resort where both Jim and Margot made reservations accidentally double-booked, and the place isn't big enough for both parties. The rival organizers could go nuclear on the poor Leslie, Jack McBrayer, the exasperated Palmetto house manager, or insist that they have the venue all to themselves. Instead, they tentatively agree to share the space, which is a recipe for conflict with two such control freaks involved. On Margot's side, there's the rest of her family to worry about. Her hypercritical mother, Celia Weston, can't let anything go without complaining, even though everyone but Margot thinks she's a sweetheart. Her siblings bother her even more, whether it's caveman Colton, Rory Scovel, who refers to his wife as the wife, or heavy-drinking and highly inappropriate Gwyneth, scene stealer Leon Morgan, who turns laconic one-liners, like, "I got a spray tan, if you're wondering what that smell is, or if I wasn't married, I'd climb him like a redwood," into quotable Insta-classics. A Tennessee stand-up with a hilariously husky drawl, Morgan might as well be this movie's answer to Melissa McCarthy. Though nothing can touch the Bridesmaids Breakout's Hall of Fame performance, Stoller follows director Paul Feig's lead in recognizing that a wedding comedy's only as entertaining as its guests. Meeting Margot's clan, it's easy to understand why she sought refuge as far away as possible. And yet, Jim instantly gets along with her family, which only makes matters worse. Meanwhile, there's something suspicious about Jim and Jenny's codependent dynamic. The way he does his daughter's hair and insists on baking the wedding cake himself. That could be coded as his having skeletons, or more, in the closet. In lieu of giving a speech, he invites Jenny up to do a duet. But their song, Islands in the Stream, is wildly inappropriate for a parent to be singing to his child. Its lyrics were clearly intended from one lover to another, aha. Whether they're playing naughty or nice, Witherspoon and Ferrell are two of the rare stars who can be charming even when trying to sabotage someone else's most important moment. And You're Cordially Invited is most fun when they're on the warpath. The trailer has tipped most of the big gags, from the disaster at the dock to Jim wrestling an alligator. But Stoller's script is strong enough that the movie's pleasures are far from spoiled. Jenny's generation is an easy target, like her hypersensitive bestie Heather, Kayla Monteroso Mejia, who's to blame for not confirming the reservation. Though the film strikes just the right tone in tripping their triggers. Stoller, who wrote The 5-Year Engagement and directed Forgetting Sarah Marshall, is notable among contemporary comic filmmakers in that he always keeps his characters grounded. And yet, not even he can solve the problem of where this story's headed. Late in the film, once the festivities have played out and Jim and Margot have gone their separate ways, Stoller introduces the idea that she doesn't want to spend the rest of her days alone. Unfortunately, there's not so much as a spark between her and Jim. Witherspoon presents Margot not as some unhappy bachelorette, but as a modern, self-reliant woman. If anyone other than Ferrell had played Jenny's teddy bear father, the movie wouldn't be half as funny, but he's an actor whose emotionally stunted shtick has never lent itself to romance. Why rethink that with this character? The thought of Jim being a sexual entity revolts his daughter, and unless the cues weren't meant to suggest as much, it's been a running joke for much of the film that he could be gay. Or else what is the unspoken secret that everyone's speculating about? But that dimension doesn't impact the film until the final stretch, by which point, You're Cordially Invited has been so much fun, wherever it's headed hardly matters. The film pulls in cameos from Peyton Manning, boy, does he look uncomfortable doing comedy, and Nick Jonas. Funny enough you wish the part were bigger. To tie up the ending nobody asked for, Stoller orchestrates one of those production-spanning sing-alongs, a la Anyone But You, where the whole cast pitches in, which is to say they rely on each other, aha. Will Ferrell and Reese Witherspoon have both been around long enough to have become the movie star equivalent of comfort food. By this point in their respective careers, you know what you're getting, especially if the project is a comedy, and if you like it, it'll fill you up for a couple of hours. You're Cordially Invited is reheated comedy leftovers, for the most part, but there's enough warmth, sentimentality, and belly laughs to make for a raucous time-waster. Ferrell plays Jim, a widower whose only daughter Jenny, Geraldine Viswanathan, breaks the news that she's just gotten engaged to her boyfriend Oliver, Stony Blyden. Jim's life has revolved mainly around Jenny since her mother died. So this is an even bigger deal than it would normally be for a dad. It is decided that the wedding will happen at Palmetto House, a venue on a tiny, remote island where Jim wed Jenny's mother decades earlier. The hard-driving Margot shuts down Jim's claim to equal access by pointing out that she put down a credit card and he didn't. So Jim retreats and devises a pathetic plan B. There's a wet and wild water park and a Super 8 motel, about 200 miles from here, that will accommodate most of us. Jim tells Margot, subtly emphasizing most, but Margot relents, and the families tries to make the best of an awkward situation in which emotions run high and egos push insecurities into the red zone. Written and directed by Stoller, forgetting Sarah Marshall, Get Him to the Greek. You're Cordially Invited wants to be a semi-risque R-rated comedy with F-bombs and cringe comedy. When Jim and Jenny perform their song at the rehearsal dinner, it's Islands in the Stream, a lover's duet, which is charming to them but no one else, and, at the same time, a heartwarming comedy about parents, children, and extended families in which scenes run long and play a bit on the shaggy side, like an independent drama that gives itself permission to marinate in the texture of life. The two impulses aren't incompatible, but, sorry. Marrying them requires a degree of finesse that Stoller has managed in the past but only sometimes summons here. Some of the big slapstick set pieces, like a disaster on a dock, stick the landing, but then the movie will shift gears into a quiet conversation scene, one that's played sincerely but may not feel that way because the film has trained you to be on your toes for the next absurdist explosion or bizarre throwaway bit. Like the glimpse of a hit game show on Margot's TV network that's titled, Is It Dead? The desire to establish early that both Margot and Jim, plus everyone in their extended families, are essentially decent people is another problem, because it lets the air out of the movie's comedic tires. If it's been determined in the first part of the story that the families are going to try to work through the misunderstanding, and that only the personalities of the participants will create momentary speed bumps rather than actual obstacles, that means the script has to come up with unconvincing contrivances to conjure tension and keep the shenanigans coming, like Jim overhearing Margot being critical of his parenting and his relationship with Jenny and being driven into a vengeful snit that seems unlike him. The result is a likable movie that feels disjointed or perhaps unfocused, or just at odds with itself. There's a better movie in here somewhere. One that's either a lot sweeter or a lot more dangerous. The minimum requirement of any comedy. It should make you laugh. All the usual critical considerations of form, content, and performance come secondary. If the movie accomplishes this basic expectation, a comedy will have fulfilled its primary purpose. Some comedies endure beyond a single viewing because their laughs are timeless. Others rely on shock-based humor and have little rewatchability as a result. I think back to Meet the Parents, 2000. A high-anxiety yarn where Ben Stiller must impress his fiancée's family, particularly his future father-in-law, Robert De Niro. It made me laugh plenty, even though most of its humor was rooted in over-the-top situations that, once seen, don't play with the same energy on a second watch. Despite never wanting to revisit Meet the Parents for this reason, I remember it fondly enough, and that's how it should remain. Regardless, the extent to which I can watch a comedy a second time and laugh just as hard factors into my assessment. With You're Cordially Invited, writer-director Nicholas Stoller's wedding comedy about two parties booked for the same exclusive venue on the same day, I thought about what makes a worthwhile comedy while writing this review. Much like Meet the Parents, an obvious inspiration here, its humor is rooted in awkward family dynamics, outrageous behavior, and wedding day debacles. The likable cast, headed by Ferrell, Reese Witherspoon, Geraldine Viswanathan, and Meredith Hagner, creates a lot of goodwill toward the material. It's a pleasant, high-energy movie that made me smile for much of its 109-minute runtime. But I must admit, my laughter was infrequent. And somewhere in the second act, it started to feel dragged out and absurd beyond the point I could enjoy the experience. Ferrell plays Jim, a widower who has filled the absence in his life by focusing on his daughter, Jenny, Geraldine Viswanathan. An early montage showcasing Jim's role as a homemaker and supportive father. He bakes, cleans, and later does Jenny's hair. Needlessly pokes fun at his stereotypically unmasculine domesticity. When Jenny announces that she's getting married to her year-long boyfriend Oliver, Stony Blyden, Jim immediately books the Palmetto Inn, a private island spot in Georgia known for its weddings. Due to a snafu, the exact date has also been booked by Margot, Reese Witherspoon, a big-shot television producer from Hollywood who vows to oversee the wedding of her younger sister Neve, Meredith Hagner, and her Chippendale dancer fiancé Dixon, Jimmy Tatro. The Palmetto's tax manager, Jack McBrayer, must organize 2 weddings, though there's no mention of where twice as many attendees would stay. Stoller, no stranger to wedding comedies after the 5-year engagement, 2012, ensures all manner of broad disasters occur. The coinciding weekend events feature drunken speeches, damaged brides, disastrous rainfall, a secret pregnancy, a plunge into water, no end of family conflict, and an awkward father-daughter performance of Islands in the Stream by Dolly Parton and Kenny Rogers. Throughout, viewers will gasp and audibly groan, "Oh no, it's that kind of movie." Margot's business bro brother, Rory Scovel, and horny older sister, Leanne Morgan, bring some laughs. So do the movie's jokes at the expense of Gen Z. When things start going wrong, Jim and Margot suspect each other of trying to sabotage their respective wedding, escalating the weekend's tension. Inevitably, their bad behavior leads to emotional blowouts and comic shocks, followed by reconciliation. Among the most tender is the restoration of the relationship between Margot and her passive-aggressive mother, Celia Weston, after a little open communication. In the last third, You're Cordially Invited sets up Ferrell and Witherspoon as a romantic pair. Maybe it's Ferrell's default mode of irony and satire, the sense that whatever he's doing, it's part of a bit, but he has never registered as a particularly sexual being in his comedies. Don't expect sparks to fly in his mismatched pairing with Witherspoon, who often appears opposite 6-foot-plus men for a comic juxtaposition. While their dynamic as enemies is playful and spirited, their lack of chemistry as a couple takes the movie into a weird place. However, pretty much everything after a random alligator arrives on the scene feels forced and unnatural. In a desperate moment, Jim brings the alligator into the Palmetto for reasons that aren't exactly clear to me. It's a comic prop that feels pulled from Carrot Top's trunk and is just as unfunny. But the filmmakers had so much faith in its hilarity they put the reptile on the poster. Stoller has consistently made hilarious, successful movies for theatrical exhibition over the years, from Forgetting Sarah Marshall, 2008, to The Muppets, 2011, to Brothers, 2022. Shot in that bright, nondescript style of most major comedies, You're Cordially Invited is another R-rated comedy relegated to streaming on Amazon Prime Video, instead of getting a theatrical release. Though communal laughter is exactly what this experience needs. Even so, it's too silly for its themes about healthy boundaries, honest communication, and the importance of family time to land with much impact. And it so often attempts to create genuine feeling that the silliness of its humor can feel incongruous. It might have played better as either less goofy or more goofy. At home, it might pleasantly divert your attention from the world for 2 hours, but it has little staying power afterward and isn't likely to earn a place among the most memorable comedies of 2025. End the doldrums of January, with Hollywood gracelessly dumping its shoddiest films. One would have understandable skepticism over Amazon's glossy wedding confection You're Cordially Invited. Recent attempts to replicate the big studio comedy for a streaming audience have almost all failed, from the intolerable Vacation Friends movies to Amazon's heinous Space Cadet, to joyless big-star Netflix vehicles like the recent Diaz/Fox mess back in action. Even its stars have tried Reese Witherspoon with charmless rom-com Your Place or Mine and Will Ferrell with grating Christmas musical Spirited, so expectations weren't just low. They were deep underground. It also didn't help that Amazon refused to provide screeners to press, a clear sign that something was up. But even with the many low bars this would all put in place, there's a surprising amount of low-rent fun to be had here, a simple and silly crowd-pleaser smartly reliant on the high-wattage appeal of 2 top-of-game professionals. Maybe my enjoyment was also boosted by something else, an ongoing frustration with the industry's inability to crown a new generation of not just legitimate movie stars but legitimate comedy stars. They seem to exist more on the outskirts now, supporting actors who are in desperate need of it. I'm not quite sure the film would really survive without the but writer-director Nicholas Stoller, who tried and failed to resurrect the big-screen Apatow comedy with the unfairly maligned brothers, knows exactly what he has and what he should do with it. Witherspoon is an actor who has teased us with brilliance in edgier films such as Election, Freeway, Pleasantville, and Wild, yet has recently chosen the high-money, low-reward gloss of the morning show, one of the most mind-bogglingly awful shows on television. This might not be a film that pushes her too far out of type, that type being type A, but Stoller gives her a spikier, saltier character than we've seen in a while, letting her curse, swig white wine, and call people road whores. The film's humor is often remarkably and refreshingly juvenile. She plays reality TV producer Margot, living in LA and openly ashamed of her coarser family in the South. Apart from Sister Neve, the wonderful Meredith Hagner, who is getting married to her stripper boyfriend. As Margot insists herself as wedding planner, at the same time, Ferrell's widowed father finds out his daughter, the also rather wonderful Geraldine Viswanathan, is also getting married, threatening their unusually close relationship. A mistake with scheduling means that both parties descend on a remote island at the same time, two weddings forced to share one space. It's an R-rated spin on Bride Wars, the Anne Hathaway-Kate Hudson comedy from 2009, a film even more reliant on star appeal to make it work. Stoller's film is far superior, another low bar, as even without his leads, there are some very funny and specific little touches in the script. There are plenty of misses, a Jonas Brother cameo, some overly absurdist physical comedy, a final song and dance, but they're just about outdone by the hits Drunk Reese, a creepy father-daughter duet of a love song, every young person in the film using the word gaslighting without knowing what it means, and so the laugh quotient ends up higher than it has been for a while. The real win here is watching Witherspoon and Ferrell show off, both unrestrained by a harder rating and a more raucous script than the norm, and while their escalation of bad behavior might not be quite as bad as it could have been, they both make for wonderfully petty antiheroes. Witherspoon in particular is a total joy, a confident comedic actor who knows exactly how big to go without going full pantomime, the sharpest performance we have seen from her in years. While the film doesn't exactly reach anywhere near real, heart-tugging emotion, the sentiment is unusually restrained and, in its portrayal of two people who have overinvested in someone who was always going to invest more in someone else, it's effectively etched. Like so many weddings, it's a little too busy with an abundance of characters and subplots to keep track of, although Celia Weston as Witherspoon's awful Southern mother is an obvious winner, and there's a final left-of-field plot development that feels like it was suggested by a particularly stupid test audience. But there's an unseasonably good time to be had here, invitation worth accepting. A double booking at an island retreat results in chaos for two wedding parties in You're Cordially Invited, which dropped on Prime Video with little fanfare this past weekend. That's a shame. This laugh-out-loud comedy from director Nicholas Stoller, forgetting Sarah Marshall, Get Him to the Greek, may not be another Wedding Crashers, but it's a lot more fun than unsuspecting streaming viewers tuning in cold might be anticipating. You're Cordially Invited stars Will Ferrell as Jim, a doting Atlanta area father who gets a shock when his college-age daughter Jenny, Drive-Away Doll's Geraldine Viswanathan, announces that she's engaged to a boyfriend, Stony Blyden. Dad barely knows. Jenny wants to get married at a small inn on Georgia's Palmetto Island, the same location that Jim and his deceased wife were hitched, and Dad books the wedding a year in advance. Only problem: the elderly innkeeper who took Jim's call croaks before she can find a working pen to book the date in the family guest book. Hotshot TV executive Margot, Reese Witherspoon, meanwhile, is tasked with planning the wedding between Sister Neve, Meredith Hagner, and Bo Dixon, Jimmy Tatro. Margot books the inn on the island that she and Neve stayed each summer with her grandmother, on the same weekend that Jim thinks he has reserved for his daughter. The two wedding parties improbably congregate on the island on the same weekend. Jenny's wedding planner Heather, Kayla Monteroso Mejia, failed to confirm with the venue, and innkeeper Leslie, 30 Rock's Jack McBrayer, soon uncovers what has transpired. But while the locale can only accommodate one party, they agree to share the island as best they can. The template for You're Cordially Invited is established early on, and like director Stoller's Neighbors films, tensions soon escalate as the frat party-like atmosphere of Jenny's wedding starts to intrude on the refined southern elegance of Neve's ceremony. And things really turn south after Jim overhears some unkind words from Margot, and the two begin to actively plot to sabotage each other's wedding. Unlike those Neighbors movies, You're Cordially Invited never delves into offensive gross-out territory, though climactic scenes involving an alligator threaten to come close. The film largely keeps the humor to a character level, and it works thanks to a terrific supporting cast that also includes Celia Weston as Neve and Margot's mother, and Rory Scovel and Leanne Morgan as their siblings. You're Cordially Invited is more lowbrow than the typical Reese Witherspoon romantic comedy. But the actress is fully up to the task here as she contrasts with Ferrell's over-the-top energy. It's a lot of fun seeing her darker side. Margot has an acidic tongue and can be downright mean at times, and recalls one of Witherspoon's most iconic roles, Election's Tracy Flick. Ferrell, meanwhile, is perfect as the manic dad who will do anything to protect his daughter. No one else in the cast can match his energy, though Monterroso Mejia, who stole her scenes in Curb Your Enthusiasm, comes close, which is offset by his deadpan delivery. A single line of work-related exposition is one of the funniest in the film. We have little interest in seeing his character develop a romantic relationship with Witherspoon's Margot, but You're Cordially Invited never takes things too far. Though a climactic smooch is undeniably awkward. Some of the side bits here, like the TV show that Margot produces and Is It Cake? Spoof titled Is It Dead? Are uproarious, though not every gag lands. Cameos from Nick Jonas and Peyton Manning elicit more of a cringe. Still, the comedy is consistent enough to produce at least a chuckle or two every few minutes, which is enough to keep us regularly entertained. A good comedy is a rare find these days, and the modest release of You're Cordially Invited on Prime Video doesn't inspire confidence. But this one hits all the right notes, and streaming viewers who happen to stumble across it are in for a pleasant surprise. Just a few years ago, a comedy like You're Cordially Invited would have made tons of money in a cinema, released at the same period as it is now. The combined star power of Will Ferrell and Reese Witherspoon in a slapstick comedy from the director of Forgetting Sarah Marshall is enough for audiences to seek out such a movie, even if it gets lambasted by critics because Ferrell and Witherspoon still have enough pull to draw audiences in. However, they have sadly been relegated to doing made-for-streaming movies, with Spirited and Your Place or Mine being the only recent projects for our respective stars. And since we now live in the year of our Lord 2025, comedies are mostly relegated to streaming platforms. Because of this, and for reasons that have never properly been explained, many of them aren't up to the quality standards they once were when studios released them in cinemas, for example, the unwatchable Back in Action on Netflix. So, color me surprised when I found Stoller's latest comedic affair to be relatively tolerable, with a few great moments of well-timed gags sprinkled through its formulaic narrative. For a while, You're Cordially Invited gets lots of momentum from its opening scene, with our protagonist, Jim, Will Ferrell, reuniting with his daughter Jenny, Geraldine Viswanathan, who announces her engagement to Oliver, Stony Blyden. The background music begins to distort because, for Jim, his world has crumbled down, leading to an accidental hand injury as he can no longer formulate a proper train of thought. This is Ferrell at his funniest in a very long time, and Stoller fully knows how to exploit his physical comedic talents perfectly. The scene is a significant highlight and sets the tone for how absurd and chaotic the rest of the movie will be, especially in how it introduces us to its conceit with Jim finally accepting her daughter's choice and deciding to book the wedding at the inn he married his late wife in. However, the innkeeper suddenly dies after their phone call and never had the time to reserve their spot on June 1st. Meanwhile, we cut to Los Angeles, where reality show director Margot, Reese Witherspoon, is visited by her sister, Neve, Meredith Hagner, who announces her engagement with her longtime boyfriend Dixon, Jimmy Tatro. And what would you know? Margot books the wedding at the same inn Jim did on June 1st because, and this is the coincidence of coincidences, she also has a personal connection to the place. Since the late innkeeper never properly reserved Jim's wedding, the current owner, Jack McBrayer, confirms their reservation. The two separate families arrive on the same day and, predictably, mayhem ensues. At that point, You're Cordially Invited begins to lose itself slightly in a series of gags that miss the mark far more than they should and feature situations too telegraphed to make any emotional impact. Once the conceit is well established and Stoller sets up a rivalry between the two families, mainly led by the animosity Margot has towards Jim, and vice versa, the movie's overall narrative becomes incredibly predictable. The rivalry between the two lead stars is relatively funny because it's exacerbated by Margot's family being wholly won over by Jim, as they believe he is a lovely, charming man with little to no flaws. Now we, the audience, know this is not true. He does have his fair share of flaws, such as being too overprotective towards his daughter and not letting her live the life she wants, especially in the wake of his wife's passing. However, he has always been sincere towards everyone he's met. On the other hand, Margot believes Jim's sincerity is, in fact, just a ruse, and he is, in reality, faking the close relationship he has with Jenny. Of course, one begs to ask, who does this benefit if he genuinely was pretending to love his daughter? When Jim overhears a private conversation between Margot and her family, who makes unflattering remarks at Jim's expense, he decides to sabotage Neve's wedding and put a plan in motion to ensure his daughter gets the best night of her life. We then get a series of slapstick sequences that aren't as funny as they should be, since we can see everything coming a mile away, except for a pointless cameo that feels very on-brand for how unmemorable most streaming offerings serve as commodities and not cinema. A wedding ceremony set at a dock? What could possibly go wrong? Jim specifically telling Margot that he baked the wedding cake for her daughter? Oh, it will absolutely not be a part of a major set piece where the rival family attempts to destroy it. No, what kind of movie do you think this is? And, of course, since this can't only be a silly comedy, we need a bit of a burgeoning romance between the two leads that could have worked had Stoller built it up from the start but doesn't feel earned when they actively do fall in love. To the movie's credit, though, Ferrell and Witherspoon are a hoot when paired together and have a more palpable sense of chemistry than Witherspoon and Ashton Kutcher did in Your Place or Mine. Perhaps cinematographer John Gillisarian's flat visual style makes their relationship feel somewhat artificial, but the two actors have enough ineffable charm to at least make their pairing enjoyable. Ferrell, in particular, continues to prove why he's one of the funniest actors working today and one of the select few who has perfected the art of sparse yelling into a true comedic powerhouse. Still works and still gets me. What can I say? Witherspoon fares so much better than her previous turn in a direct-to-streaming romantic comedy, thanks in no small part to an active sense of comedic timing with Ferrell, though their romantic side isn't great. This results in a hilariously endearing conclusion that ultimately cements You're Cordially Invited as a pleasant watch, even if its narrative hurdles stumble the movie way too much into frequently familiar territory. When Stoller uses archival clips of Viswanathan as a child during its final scene as a way to represent the loving relationship Jim has with Jenny, which continues to develop as she grows older, Stoller desperately tries to pull our heartstrings and feel for the father-daughter bond that was always at the core of the movie. In that regard, he succeeds in giving life to You're Cordially Invited, despite significant moments that dampen the enjoyment we have in watching Will Ferrell go head-to-head with Reese Witherspoon in the land of predictability. Yet, since they have an enjoyable sense of play together, it's not hard to be won over by what the film proposes, pun intended, though not without some reservations. On-sidering the world has gone mad. This ought to be the ultimate era for chaos comedy. Movies in which alligators are wrestled into bed, in which hoity-toity wedding guests get buzzed by passing motorboats, in which male strippers show up to bear their wares at the damnedest times. We need that kind of release valve right now. But we don't really get it from writer-director Nicholas Stoller's You're Cordially Invited, a comedy that packs its gags so densely, and often so carelessly, that nothing much sticks. In an age of chaos, what we really need is focus, and You're Cordially Invited chases down every distraction in sight. Will Ferrell stars as Atlanta widower dad Jim, who takes great pride in having raised his daughter Jenny, Geraldine Viswanathan, on his own. She's grown up and moved out, but he prepares for her visits by baking 3 kinds of cookies and steaming the wrinkles from her clothes. It's a bit much, but that's the joke. He's the dad who loves too much, and Jenny, while happy enough to go through the motions of their affectionate little routines, feels a bit constrained. When she shows up with her boyfriend in tow, Stony Blyden's Oliver, and announces the two are engaged, Jim's face falls like a saga souffle. He'll never be ready to let her go. But he does want her to be happy. So he calls up the Tony Quaint Island Inn where he and Jenny's mother were married many moons ago and books the joint for their June 1st nuptials. Or at least he thinks he's booked it. Because over in Los Angeles, control-freak reality TV show producer Margot, Reese Witherspoon, has just learned that her beloved baby sister Neve, Meredith Hagner, has also become engaged. Neve is anxious because she believes her scarily conventional Southern family doesn't approve of her fiancé, a hot and sweet male dancer named Dixon, Jimmy Tatro. Neve worries about this because she's the peacekeeper of the family, while Margot has almost completely estranged herself from them. She just can't tolerate her highly judgmental mother, Flora, Celia Weston, and two unimaginative siblings, Rory Scovel's Colton and Leanne Morgan's Gwyneth. But she'll do anything for Neve, and she wastes no time taking charge of the wedding, booking it immediately at a place that holds happy memories for the two bonded sisters, which just happens to be the same intimate little island establishment Jim has just reserved. The place can host only one wedding per weekend. What's going to happen when two brides and their guests? One set consisting mostly of rowdy Gen Z types, the other a more staid bunch decked out in tasteful navy blazers and flowery garden party dresses, descend upon an island wedding venue that can barely handle half of them. When these two disparate groups show up, Margot and Jim lock horns immediately, which is probably what brought you to your Cordially Invited in the first place, right? The idea of Ferrell and Witherspoon in a romantic comedy, especially a chaotic romantic comedy, is appealing enough. But beyond some half-hearted sniping, these two rarely go at it. Ferrell's semi-zonked out me worry energy is moderately enjoyable, but he spends much of his time prattling through generation gap jokes, reinforcing how hard it is for the olds to understand kids today. Jenny and her friends joyfully refer to one another as bitches, but they're aghast when Dad Jim refers to a woman as a lady. That could make for an okay throwaway joke if you rebound off it quickly enough. Instead, the gag goes on for one beat, then two, then another, and before you know it, whether you're a young or an old, we're all into eye-rolling territory. The jokes don't bounce or zigzag. They merely clonk against one another, feeling their way along in the dark. Witherspoon fares a little better. An accomplished businesswoman, Margot bristles repeatedly when her family demeans her, especially Flora. As Flora, Weston gives the best performance in the movie, serving up choice icy mom zingers as if they were morsels of red velvet cake. Witherspoon seems to relish these exchanges. She's good at playing these persnickety take-charge types, but she knows how to keep them from feeling like tired stereotypes. When Flora manages to deride Margot for her overachieving personality and her childlessness in one effortless glissando, Margot shoots back. You just crammed so many insults into so few words it was like an insult haiku. It's funny, but it also feels believable in a prickly way. Even parents who love us are sometimes all too capable of cutting us down. But that's also part of the problem with your Cordially Invited. It leans into so many knowing truths. At some point, parents just need to let their grown kids go. Horrid moms often have reasons for behaving badly, that it ends up feeling passively self-helpy. Stoller has given us some enjoyable comedies, Forgetting Sarah Marshall, Neighbors, and it seems that he genuinely wants to present us with more of the same. Zaniness served up with a slight edge, but your Cordially Invited isn't particularly sharp or zany. And it takes forever for Jim and Margot to realize that they're made, or at least semi-made, for one another. They kiss eventually, but boy, do you have to wait for it, and even then, it feels like something they should do rather than want to do. The movie's setting, one of those fancy, old-fashioned, gracious Southern inns favored by white people with money, is pretty enough. There's a dancing zebra, or, rather, a guy dressed up as one. And if you're looking for a sight gag about the way boring folks from the suburbs all drive the same white Chevy Suburban, your Cordially Invited has that, too. It's the kind of movie you can have running in the background, without paying it too much mind. We're getting more and more of those these days. They're not diversions, they don't demand enough from us for that. Instead, they have a narcotic quality. They don't seek to sharpen our senses but to dull them. That's the opposite of what we need in an age of chaos. It's okay to put an audience to work to make us think on our feet, which is so much more enjoyable than dragging them. Will Ferrell and Reese Witherspoon teamed up for the first time in Your Cordially Invited. With two of the biggest names in entertainment, the movie poster sets a high standard which the film ultimately fails to live up to. Produced by Reese Witherspoon's iconic production company, Hello Sunshine, the film follows Jim, Will Ferrell, and Margot, Reese Witherspoon, through a chaotic series of events. Jim's daughter Jenny, Geraldine Viswanathan, and Margot's sister Neve, Meredith Hagner, are double-booked for their weddings at an inn on an island in Georgia, ensuing in a chain of moments which, while often comedic or touching, fail to come together into a strong, cohesive framework. The movie explores family dynamics by contrasting Jim and Margot's families with each other, sparking nuanced reflection on the importance of family and what it means when one is too far, or too close, to it. The comparison of Jim's small family and his love of it with Margot's large family, and her initial denouncement of it makes a touching plea to hold family close. Towards the end of the film, moments within the families offer satisfyingly vulnerable moments of closeness, highlighted by mid-shots and tearful apologies from all parties involved. However, emotional interactions in the middle of the movie lack the same impact. Instead of being shot with both characters in the same frame as seen towards the end of the film, these emotional scenes are shot with only one person shown at a time. Although this choice could be a reflection of the tension of characters at odds with each other at this point in the film, the visual divide makes it difficult to feel an emotional connection between the characters. The best moments of the film are hilariously funny, from wrestling matches with live alligators to dancing zebras and wedding cake disasters. While Ferrell certainly shines in this area, so do others, such as Leon Morgan as Margot's Aunt Gwyneth with her raspy southern drawl and keen eye for attractive young men. Although Jim and Margot have many interesting parallels, their romance at the end of the film is unconvincing. Margot realizes that Jim is interested in her only after other people let her in on it. Furthermore, she thinks back to a series of Jim's awkward half-smiles at her as proof. The enemies to lovers trope feels forced and rushed, as these half-smiles don't seem to justify to the viewer why she falls for a man who sabotaged her sister's wedding weekend. Instead, it feels like the couple got together to fill the void after the people who mean the most to them in the world no longer relied on them as much. Like in Stoller's 2008 film, Forgetting Sarah Marshall, the music throughout You're Cordially Invited is an absolute blast. Whether it's Jim listening to Isn't She Lovely while thinking about Jenny or the pair singing their duet of Islands in the Stream, the song choices successfully highlighted the awkward closeness of the father-daughter relationship. The laughably emotional performances also help to better define this awkward closeness as dependence rather than creepiness, making the overall effect illuminative rather than weird. And, in moments of tension between Jim and Margot, the operatic soundtrack adds to the comedic effect with its out-of-place feel, successfully mirroring the irrational fixation that Jim and Margot had on making the weekend perfect. Despite the lack of romantic chemistry between the main characters, the emotional family moments and off-the-rails comedy make the movie worth watching, at least for its short 109-minute runtime. There is really nothing that is not completely predictable about Amazon Prime Video's latest big-budget romantic comedy, but with Reese Witherspoon back in the genre, and Will Ferrell doing what he does best, the chemistry is there and so are some laughs, including a real LOL moment involving Ferrell and an uncooperative alligator that is a good reason comedies should probably best be seen with a crowd. Unfortunately, despite its stars and fan-friendly genre, this one is straight to streaming. At least in a Valentine's Day period, You're Cordially Invited qualifies more appropriately as a far more pleasant date movie than the horror and action Valentine's movie the studios have planned this year. It isn't going to make you forget My Best Friend's Wedding, Bridesmaids, and Father of the Bride anytime soon, but it'll do. Even as the R rating here seems a little harsh, the premise is simple and writer-director Nicholas Stoller, Neighbors, Forgetting Sarah Marshall, Get Him to the Greek, is skilled enough to basically take it from the setup and let his stars do their thing. Set at the picturesque Lake Oconee, 75 miles east of Atlanta, the location oozes old-world charm. The Palmetto Inn, however, can only accommodate one wedding per weekend, and through happenstance, 2 weddings get accidentally booked with no one, including hotel clerk Leslie, Jack McBrayer in the Paul Lynde role. Realizing it until both Margot, Witherspoon, determined to throw the perfect wedding for beloved sister Neve, Meredith Hagner, and Jim, Ferrell, also set to give daughter Jenny, Geraldine Viswanathan, who he brought up alone after the death of his wife. A perfect wedding even, if he finds it hard letting go and thinks she is too young. Both show up at the front desk at the same time, but when it is discovered Margot's credit card was the only deposit, she gets preference. However, after a few hours, she takes pity on Jim and his clan, agreeing to share the space with the gorgeous boat dock on the lake serving as the anchor for both weddings, which are timed to take place before sundown. Of course, it isn't all that easy when Jim overhears Margot telling her family some bad things about his family, and so he sets a bit of revenge in motion that causes. So as far as lazy Sunday films go, you could certainly do worse. As I alluded to earlier, there are some genuine laughs found, if not consistently. The supporting cast, which also includes sharp talent like Jack McBrayer, Rory Scovel, and especially Celia Weston, are all good for some light gaffes, which is enough to keep you half interested throughout. It also helps that, as Ferrell gets older and more gray in the face, it's becoming easier to accept him as a burgeoning dramatic performer, which makes some light moments between him and the always delightful Viswanathan hold some warm emotionality, even amid the forced swearing. As far as recent Ferrell productions go, this is far from the worst and not offensive and or contemptuous like, say, Get Hard or Zoolander 2. But that's a kind way of waving off what is, sadly, yet another ho-hum starring vehicle for late-period Ferrell. The bottom line: You're Cordially Invited falls in line with what you can expect from Ferrell at this point. A generally mediocre, if not entirely unpleasant, comedy that lacks the sizzle, if not the sincerity, of his earlier, mostly better works. But for fans of Nicholas Stoller, a writer-director who does good work in an inconsistent genre, this prime title marks a sad low. Not an embarrassment, but a disappointment all the same. While You're Cordially Invited suggests a return to his roots, it's diminishing returns for a director who usually invites a lot more laughs than this one produces. On the surface, You're Cordially Invited has a premise precision-tooled for pure rom-com hijinks. 2 weddings, 1 venue, multiple sabotage attempts on behalf of each family. And while filmmaker Nicholas Stoller peppers his latest with all kinds of explosive incidents, cake smashing, dock destroying, gator wrestling acts of carnage, they somehow prove less interesting than what's going on under the hood of his protagonist. That shouldn't be a surprise, since Stoller's Forgetting Sarah Marshall always sat on the more heartfelt end of the Apatow bro comedy spectrum, while his Bad Neighbors grounded its houses at war premise in the very real panic of new parenthood. You're Cordially Invited offers a similarly emotional basis to underpin its set pieces. Will Ferrell's Jim is stunned when his college graduate daughter, Blocker's Geraldine Viswanathan, comes home with a shiny rock on her finger. He raised her solo after his wife's death, and throws himself into wedding planner mode to mask his turmoil. Meanwhile, Reese Witherspoon's high-powered TV exec Margot has long felt disconnected from her family, with a long-standing rift between her and her mother. When her sister Neve, Meredith Hagner, drops the wedding bombshell, she sees her chance to take charge and wrangle back her place in the family. Throughout You're Cordially Invited, Jim and Margot's increasingly desperate and selfish attempts to thwart the other's family nuptials are consistently and effectively anchored to their own insecurities and inadequacies. Ferrell and Witherspoon perform it all convincingly, their quieter moments of reflection proving the highlights here. The trouble is, the comedy topping feels a bit underpowered, despite a talented cast. There simply aren't enough laughs to fill nearly 2 hours. And with 2 weddings, both featuring extended family and friend networks, the material is spread a little thin across an array of supporting characters. The ever-great Viswanathan feels underused, but gives it her all when she's on screen, including in some deeply inappropriate father-daughter wedding karaoke. New York film combining the comedy talents of Will Ferrell and Reese Witherspoon is unlikely to be entirely terrible. That said, the wildly uneven wedding clash comedy You're Cordially Invited is certainly in the vicinity of terrible on numerous occasions. Ferrell plays Jim, the smothering, widowed dad of Jenny, Geraldine Viswanathan. Witherspoon is Margot, the overprotective older sister of Neve, played by Meredith Hagner. When, due to an administrative snafu, Jenny's and Neve's weddings are double-booked at the same venue, Jim and Margot are determined that their loved ones will still get their day to remember, no matter the cost to the rival party or to personal dignity. Wedding catastrophe clichés abound. Cakes, hair and frocks take the brunt of the physical comedy. Ferrell's crocodile wrestling scene. Due to an unexpected and unavoidable error, 2 families have accidentally booked the same wedding venue, the Palmetto Inn, on a secluded island that doesn't have space for both of them. After some initial hostility, the father of one bride, Jim, Will Ferrell, Barbie, and the sister of the other, Margot, Reese Witherspoon, American Psycho, agree to terms in order to ensure their families both enjoy the day without invading too much in the other's proceedings. Quickly, these terms begin to blend, flex, and break as Jim and Margot thwart to destroy the opposing wedding, potentially ruining both in the process. I love seeing Will Ferrell do these more dutiful and loving characters, and Jim feels like a fresh character that would have appeared in SNL during his time there. His is a relatable, loving father, perhaps too involved in his daughter's life to really do anything for himself. At the same time, he carries a nice amount of emotional heft as a widowed husband who is shouldering so much responsibility in the proper care of daughter Jenny, Geraldine Viswanathan, Drive Away Dolls. As he relates to Margot in the film, when a child reaches the age of 18, you will have spent 92% of the time you will ever spend with them, which is a beautifully moving and tender revelation that made me want to call my parents. It's refreshing to see Ferrell show some more range, and I think he captures the emotional beats as well as he hits the comedic ones. On the opposite end of the spectrum, Witherspoon's Margot is a hard-hitting counterpart who dearly loves her sister and will do anything to ensure the perfect wedding. This is an interesting role for Witherspoon, who seems to be channeling Elle Woods if she closed herself off from the world. She finds a relatability with Margot that let me understand her even when I couldn't condone her. It's also nice to see her go toe-to-toe with Ferrell in handling the comedy rather than playing the straight man role to his goofier Jim. Stoller has an elegant direction here, with a more sweet and sappy tone, some beautiful title cards which break up the narrative into chapters, you know I love that, and gives the finished product enough gravitas that when things get silly it's almost jarring. This comedy feels more in line with the 5-year engagement with much better humor than Forgetting Sarah Marshall or Neighbors, and I think Stoller's restraint helps makes for a pleasant raunchy comedy. Unfortunately, Stoller attempts for a romantic angle with Ferrell and Witherspoon that absolutely doesn't work in the movie. Apart from the fact that I don't think the two had romantic chemistry, they have much better animosity chemistry. I found that Stoller didn't devote enough time in the screenplay for this to work, and it comes off as a complete diversion for the characters that isn't successful at all. Thankfully, this choice doesn't derail the experience, and the laughs that are derived from it work well enough to overlook this issue. You're Cordially Invited is not an all-time classic, but there are still plenty of good laughs, and I hope it finds an audience and doesn't end up buried in the endless streaming options. Having seen the film in a theater, I wish that option was offered to others. I was laughing plenty and feeling the beautiful moments that the two families were able to play on, thanks to some elegant direction from Stoller, even when the screenplay missing a few narrative beats in the process. Seek this one out on Prime Video for a few good laughs with some friends as the clock ticked towards 7 p.m. on a dreary Wednesday evening a few weeks ago. I contemplated the promotional poster for Nicholas Stoller's You're Cordially Invited. Reese Witherspoon, splendid in a navy dress, looks on horrified, as Will Ferrell wrestles an alligator. A row ahead of me, an older, white, balding gentleman, you know the type, gestured wildly at this image. This is so classically male and female, he said, with a slightly southern drawl. The male is just trying so hard to impress the female. My friend and I shared a glance, giggled, and moved on. To our shock, right in the last 15 or so minutes of the film, Witherspoon and Ferrell declared their love for each other. And honestly, I couldn't have been more disappointed. The older moviegoer, who genuinely used the terms male and female to describe a couple, was right. The premise of You're Cordially Invited promised a light and enjoyable comedic experience, which it more or less fulfilled. When his daughter Jenny, Geraldine Viswanathan, a recent college graduate, announces her sudden engagement, single father Jim, Will Ferrell, wants to organize the best wedding possible for his only daughter. Meanwhile, Margot, Reese Witherspoon, is requested to plan her younger sister Neve's, Meredith Hagner, wedding. Due to a strange cosmic fluke, the two double-book a small, quaint island venue in Georgia and are forced to share the space, leading to a lot of chaos between the two wedding parties. The film certainly didn't attempt to break the formula of the romantic comedy. Estranged from her family, Margot is an independent corporate woman who is reluctant to admit that she wants more in life than her successful career. Jim is a stereotypical widower with a heart of gold, striving to no end to give his daughter the best life he can. Drawn to each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, they eventually fall in love. Their romance is a tamer example of the enemies to lovers trope, swinging from an absurd rivalry to a stable camaraderie and an eventual affection. As a comedic pair, Witherspoon and Ferrell complemented each other well. While many of the comedic scenes were rather over the top, both actors delivered charismatic and high-energy performances that transformed the dramatics into something enjoyable. That being said, their romance was rushed, squeezed into the final moments of the film as if an afterthought. Can't a man and woman simply be friends in film? You're Cordially Invited wouldn't have been much different if they didn't kiss at the end. As to the comedy on the whole, the jokes and physical slapstick were pretty split between cringeworthy or entertaining. As is common in recent comedies written by men over 40, Gen Z was often the target of mockery for the sake of laughs, particularly Jenny's wedding guests, her friends from college. Her bridesmaids are a comically large posse of stereotypical sorority girls, who constantly screech and drop the word gaslight flagrantly. I never appreciate these shallow jabs, but at the very least, older generations were butts of jokes too. My favorite part of the film was its exploration of the trials and joys of parent-child relationships. Margot's strained relationship with her unappeasable mother and her reluctance to rejoin a family that shunned her gave her this vulnerability that really rounded out her character. Jim's inexhaustible attempts to make his daughter happy were mainly sweet, though sometimes a bit much, and a cute montage of Jenny growing up toward the end of the film may or may not have made me tear up a little. Despite the rushed romantic ending, You're Cordially Invited was overall pretty enjoyable if you're looking for something light to take your mind off things. I will warn you, however, that one Islands in the Stream cover scene is pretty painful to get through. There's been quite a bit of talk lately that the word cringe has become overused as an adjective to describe things that are off-putting. But there's also no word that can better describe the mid-level comedy You're Cordially Invited. Cringe is what You're Cordially Invited aims for, even though writer-director Nicholas Stoller, forgetting Sarah Marshall, the 5-year engagement brothers, and big-name stars Reese Witherspoon and Will Ferrell, who also serve as producers, miss the target more than they hit. It's one of those comedies built on a litany of misunderstandings that lead to embarrassing situations designed to make viewers gasp, groan, and wince as much as they laugh, which is the definition of cringe. It's a tried and true formula, but most of the cringe here comes from the story's contrived, predictable, and uninspired nature. Jim, Ferrell, is an overly doting, but unquestionably devoted and loving widower from Atlanta who has built his entire personality and lifestyle around his daughter, Jenny, Geraldine Viswanathan. She surprises her dad by saying that she's engaged to her DJ boyfriend, Oliver Stoney Blyden. And although Jim doesn't care for her choice in men, he agrees to book the same beloved island venue where he married her mother for the big day. Meanwhile, on the opposite coast in Los Angeles, reality television producer and suburban Atlanta expat Margot Witherspoon learns that her sister, Neve Meredith Hagner, is engaged to her ex-military/current exotic dancer boyfriend, Dixon Jimmy Tatro. Although Margot hates the fact that this joyous occasion means having to endure awkward conversations with the sister's passive-aggressive, backwards thinking, and overly critical mother, Celia Weston. She agrees to plan the wedding, booking, you guessed it, the same island venue as Jim, because they have fond memories of summering with their grandmother there. Now, you see, this island is small, so they can only accommodate one wedding per weekend, and wouldn't you know it, through a cruel twist of fate, everyone shows up expecting that everything has been taken care of. Even though, legally, logistically, financially, and organizationally, Margot has the booking dead to rights, she feels bad for Jim and Jenny, agreeing to work something out with the father of the other bride so they can. It doesn't work out well for either party, and not just because Jenny's wedding has a lot of young people keen on having a dance party rager, and Neve's is for a more traditional, largely suburban and older Southern crowd. Eventually, Jim and Margot hate each other so much they set about willfully sabotaging the other person's plans, although Stoller has proven to be adept at this specific kind of comedy in the past. Visually nondescript and straightforward, character-driven, and heavy on the gags, You're Cordially Invited is so forced and hackneyed in its approach that one almost thinks a funnier and more poignant movie could be made from taking the harder route of having normal things go wrong in both families, enduring, and bonding the best they can through the process. But because that idea doesn't lend itself to hijinks and wackiness easily enough, Stoller and company take the well-worn path to a handful of hearty chuckles and not much else to show for their troubles. It's not that You're Cordially Invited is devoid of laughs, but rather that its minimal successes are entirely dependent on the strength of its cast to deliver assured comedic performances and spin otherwise bland witticisms and convoluted set pieces into laughs through the art of reaction and the clever turning of a phrase. Without the star power of Witherspoon and Ferrell and the strong supporting cast behind them, You're Cordially Invited would be dead in the water, amid their feuding and teeth gnashing. You're Cordially Invited asks Witherspoon and Ferrell to display a strain, will they or won't they romantic chemistry that never convinces or takes hold. They're much better going at it as enemies or friendly kindred spirits in some of Stoller's more wholesome moments. Both are great at tapping into their characters' vindictive senses of entitlement, But Stoller has unconsciously skewed things so Witherspoon's character comes across as infinitely more likable, decidedly less creepy, thanks to Jim's borderline inappropriate relationship to Jenny, and almost always on the right side of the moral and logical argument. I think we're supposed to feel for Jim and his decades of sadness and grief, but Ferrell's wacky performance and the script's need to turn him into a maniacal clown makes that almost impossible. Whenever the sappiness dial swings towards his character, the story suffers from a lack of equal ground between Ferrell and Witherspoon. Witherspoon and Ferrell do their parts admirably, and You're Cordially Invited offers great showings for underrated talents Viswanathan and Tatro, both of whom deserve to be much bigger stars. Maybe if there's a sequel, they could be the leads. It would certainly make me more excited to watch a second one of these. But amid all the embarrassing faux pas, comedic misunderstandings, mean-natured pranks, silly little cameos, and people learning a lot about themselves and their relationships with others, You're Cordially Invited doesn't offer anything special. It offers a modestly okay time, but that's about it. And that's fine, I guess, if that's all you want from this and not an actually great movie. But movies like this should offer and follow through on a lot more than they deliver. You are cordially invited to not watch You're Cordially Invited. Released on Amazon Prime Video, this Will Ferrell/Reese Witherspoon comedic vehicle is an outright disaster of Hindenburg proportions. Writer-director Nicholas Stoller, get him to the Greek, forgetting Sarah Marshall, has helmed a comedy that is choppy, poorly acted with a dullish and predictable script, and has characters that are either annoying or are stereotypes from a myriad of other bad comedies. While there are inevitably a couple of laughs to be had, Ferrell continues a streak of rather underwhelming comedies. Witherspoon's effort appears forced at times while having about as much chemistry with Ferrell as there is water in the Mojave Desert. Jim, Ferrell, is a widowed father who has raised his daughter, Jenny, Geraldine Viswanathan, blockers, since she was 6 years old. To describe him as over-attentive, smothering, and too apologetic would be an understatement. Margot is a never-been-married, childless TV producer in Los Angeles who keeps her family in Atlanta at a distance, emotionally speaking, except for her bubbly younger sister, Neve, Meredith Hagner, Joyride. Worlds collide when Jim and Margot, unbeknownst to one another, call a small resort on Palmetto Island, Georgia to schedule Jenny and Neve's wedding day. The double booking leads to an uncomfortable circumstance since the venue is too small for 2 weddings. At first, Jim and Margot are able to work everything out, but personality conflicts, jealousies, and pettiness lead to disaster for both weddings. The family of Margot and Neve was apparently crafted to appear as a quirky bunch of characters that we are supposed to find amusing. Instead, they are boorish cardboard cutouts. The fake townspeople of Mel Brooks's Rock Ridge had more personality. Jenny's wedding party consists of some of the most annoying, idiotic, non-funny characters ever assembled for a comedy flick. Witherspoon is just not funny, and Ferrell is reduced to wrestling an animatronic alligator in a tuxedo to generate laughs, a gimmick that doesn't work. Their pairing is awkward while the story is about as predictable as knowing the sun is going to come up tomorrow. Cameos by Peyton Manning and Nick Jonas are, for lack of a better word, weird and poorly utilized. Overall, decline this wedding invitation and watch something that is entertaining instead, like Dune 2 or Paint Drying. The 3 primary collaborators of You're Cordially Invited, who play the largest functional role in determining its prospects, have all made successful romantic comedies before, both creatively and financially. For writer-director Nicholas Stoller, it's Forgetting Sarah Marshall, the Hawaiian set 2008 charmer. Will Ferrell has Elf in His Corner, both one of the best Christmas movies of all time and one of the best romantic comedies. Reese Witherspoon tends to have less of a signature success in this area, but you can choose from a half-dozen smaller hits that put her pluck and charisma to great use. Throw them together, though, and they've just made one of the worst romantic comedies in recent memory. You're Cordially Invited alternates between obnoxiously braying and sickeningly sweet. If it's possible to send your regrets on this one before even pressing play on Amazon Prime, where the film is newly released, it may help preserve these collaborators' previously unblemished records in your mind. You're Cordially Invited is part of the subset of romantic comedies we can think of as the wedding disaster movie. You know the ones. The bride and groom, whether they are central or side characters, will go through the ringer of physical pratfalls and other existential threats to their union as the big day approaches. with many of these occurring during the actual ceremony. In this case, there are two brides and grooms because the central conceit is that the same inn on the same small Florida island, the Palmetto, has booked two weddings for the same weekend, when it has the capacity for only one. This error occurred when the very old woman who tried to take the first reservation, who remembers the 57-year-old Ferrell's character from when he and his own wife got married there, died just after starting to scribble it down, having only scratched an indentation into the page of their diary due to her pen being out of ink. Ferrell's Jim, a widower for some 20 years now, is trying to reserve the spot for his own daughter Jenny's marriage to her fiancé Oliver, whom he doesn't like because he fears Oliver will take her away from him. They're played by Geraldine Viswanathan and Stony Blydon. Because the reservation did not, in fact, get taken, the woman's successor at the inn, Leslie, Jack McBrayer, is able to use a pen that works to book the weekend for a competing party. Why, in present day, none of this is being done by computers is unbelievable, even for a place that prides itself on quaintness. That bride and groom are Neve, Meredith Hagner, and Dixon, Jimmy Tatro, with Neve's sister, Margot Witherspoon, doing the booking. Needless to say, none of this is figured out before the wedding date actually arrives, leaving the two wedding parties to either share the facilities or kill each other in the process of not sharing. The problems with Stoller's script are many, but let's start with the flaws of the other two collaborators which tie in with that script. Neither Ferrell nor Witherspoon has figured out who their characters are, leading to wildly inconsistent portrayals with no center. One version of Ferrell's brand is the sort of bullying competitiveness on display in his interactions with Christina Applegate in Anchorman, The Legend of Ron Burgundy, and there's little doubt that's what he's trying to duplicate with Witherspoon, arguing through gritted teeth, their faces inches from one another. The thing is, Ron Burgundy came by his moments of lesser grace through sheer bluster and buffoonishness, unable to know himself well enough to know better. Jim, on the other hand, seems like he's a premeditated a-hole, which makes it very difficult to like him, even when he switches, at the drop of a hat, to the aforementioned sickeningly sweet mode. Witherspoon's flaws are not as evident, but they result in just as little ability to know or like her Margot. Her conflict is that she has moved away from the slightly backward ways of her Southern family, both literally through a move to Los Angeles and figuratively through a divergence from them politically. The jokes about politics inspire particular groans. This is all very surface level and we don't understand her core. The film's most effective moments, which are precious few, come when she plays these issues out with her mother, Celia Weston, whose return to a prominent screen role is deserving of a far better film. The thinness of the other party is embodied by Jenny's bridesmaids, who make zero impression despite being in the movie from the start. It's hard to understate just how wildly this film swings between its polarities. It is broad even in its smaller moments, such as the secret language between Jenny and Jim in which they call each other complicated nicknames, the verbal version of a custom handshake. Ferrell's lack of chemistry with Viswanathan, also seen in his interactions with Witherspoon, means that not only do these two not seem like father and daughter, they actually seem like complete strangers. Once we get on the small island, every complication is played out at its absolute highest volume, often with its meanest spirit, with none of the laughs to reward those choices. When the conflicts in the two wedding parties reach their fever pitch with about 35 minutes remaining in the movie, it gives us an accurate sense of foreboding about how much gooey sentiment Stoller and company are trying to jam into this film's final third. If you think you didn't need 35 minutes of reconciliations between aggrieved parties at the end of this movie, you're right. Your Cordially Invited has likable performers top to bottom, but that's the only thing saving it from the lowest numerical rating in Real Good system. It's not the type of movie that puts you in mind of giving out sympathy points. We've liked these people before and they will do great work again. This work is the polar opposite of great. The last truly funny, downright gut-busting, Will Ferrell performance was the other guy's. Most of Ferrell's best comedies were made with filmmaker Adam McKay. Mid-2000s classics like Step Brothers, Anchorman, and Talladega Nights. But ever since Ferrell played off against Mark Wahlberg as a pair of pencil-pushing cops hoping for their chance at crime-stopping stardom, and Ferrell and McKay's fruitful partnership eventually came to an end, the returns on his comedic work have greatly diminished. He plays the same character, iterations on the same bumbling goof prone to temper tantrums, which McKay had a firmer grasp on mining genuine jokes and better performances out of. Even Ferrell's small role in Barbie, his funniest performance in years, is another attempt at resurrecting the past. This is all to say that Nicholas Stoller's You're Cordially Invited is just another rung on the ladder of disappointment which has come to define Ferrell's post-McKay acting career, emblematic of the laziest instincts of modern mainstream comedies and the inability of filmmakers to make Ferrell's shtick feel fresh. The bumbling, good-natured, if hair-trigger, oaf that Ferrell has made his signature endures once more as widowed father Jim, whose young daughter Jenny, Geraldine Viswanathan, breaks the news that she's marrying her DJ boyfriend Oliver, Stony Blyden. Shocked and upset at first, a profane outburst ensues in place of actual comedy. Jim relents and happily books his daughter's wedding venue at the very location where he and Jenny's mom got married. But when the elderly owner dies in the middle of trying to jot down Jenny's booking, the owner's son Leslie, Jack McBrayer, accidentally double books them with the wedding of Neve, Meredith Hagner, and Dixon, Jimmy Tatro, handled by Neve's older, girl-boss sister Margot, Reese Witherspoon. The two families arrive at the tiny island locale of their respective weddings, where the booking snafu reveals itself to Jim and Margot upon check-in. Hostile at first, the mismatched pair reaches a truce. Though the island is too small to host multiple weddings at once, Jim and Margot agree to swap inside and outside for their receptions and split the sunset time frame for their ceremonies. All seems settled, and the disparate wedding parties even exhibit signs of earnest camaraderie. Jim and Jenny's outdoor rehearsal bash gets rained out, and their fratty, fun-loving guests overtake the stately indoor rehearsal dinner of Margot and Neve's dignified Southern family. Margot's estranged relatives seem charmed by the devil-may-care attitude of their matrimonial counterparts. But a stray comment said in anger by Margot, naturally overheard by Jim, plunges the family's armistice into all-out war. Shenanigans ensue, as both couples' dream weddings turn into nightmares. Yet this big comic cast is hardly giving anything close to their best. Actors over-emote, contorting their faces in poor attempts at physical comedy, searching with their bodies for jokes that aren't there. Viswanathan and Kayla Monterroso Mejia, who plays Jenny's best friend and gave an all-timer cringe performance on Curb Your Enthusiasm, both appear stuck in a high school play where they compete for who can do the most acting. Tatro, who broke out on American Vandal, gets almost nothing aside from an early scene where he's sneaking selfies with Peyton Manning. Why do mainstream comedies always need athlete cameos? Witherspoon, like Ferrell, is securely within her wheelhouse as a high-strung type A. Also like Ferrell, she's doing absolutely nothing interesting within her familiar typecasting. The only consistently amusing actor is McBrayer, just playing another version of Kenneth from 30 Rock. But when McBrayer is given little else to do other than make a nervous face, he at least delivers in spades. Stoller, who also penned the screenplay, probably wasn't the director or writer for the job. His comedic oeuvre reached its heights through scripts that he either co-wrote or didn't write at all. Forgetting Sarah Marshall, handily his best film, was written by star Jason Segel. Without a writing partner, Stoller flounders to write jokes that are jokes and not just a character swearing loudly. That's 90% of You're Cordially Invited. Isn't it funny that Will Ferrell is saying, fuck? And isn't it funny that little prim and proper Reese Witherspoon is saying, fuck, right back at him? It's all cheap shots. Jokes about how young people are afraid to use the phone and are unemployed because of the economy, or disconnected wackiness like Jim falling into the river and heaving an alligator back into the hotel in an attempt to get back at Margot. Beyond that, the expected beats are hit, leading to a predictable conclusion and dressed up in the usual nothingness of comedy cinematography. DP John Gillisarian also shot Cocaine Bear, and he's all that. At the screening for this made-for-streaming footnote, studio head Jennifer Salk emerged on stage to introduce the film and referred to Ferrell and Witherspoon as a comedy dream team. Whose dream? You're Cordially Invited is a rigorously unoriginal and uncreative film, in compliance with the flat mundanity of content that the streaming giants want their audiences to bask in. Ferrell's smiling, goofball face at the forefront of this monotony feels like the waving white flag of an unchallenged artist who would rather just give in. Movie review. Jim's daughter, Jenny, is his whole world. Ever since his wife, Jenny's mother, died, he's done everything he can to ensure Jenny's happiness. And what would make Jenny happy is to get married at the Palmetto House, a quaint inn on a private island where her parents got married. Jim isn't going to let Jenny down. He makes the call and books the whole island for June 1st. But he's not the only one making a call to the island. Margot doesn't like her family and they don't like her except for her baby sister, Neve, that is. Ever since they were little girls, Margot and Neve have had each other's backs. And Neve acts as a sort of peacemaker between Margot and the rest of the fam. So when Neve says she wants to get married at the Palmetto house, the place she and Margot spent countless summers with their beloved grandmother, Margot is on it. She makes the call and books the whole island for June 1st. Wait, that can't be right, can it? Unfortunately, due to the untimely death of the innkeeper, there was a bit of a clerical error, and the Palmetto house is double booked. The mistake might have been remedied sooner, but Jenny asked her sorority sister, a notorious party girl with an inhibiting fear of phone calls, to plan the wedding, and the young woman never thought to confirm the reservation. No worries. Jim is there to save his little girl's big day. It takes a little negotiating, not to mention a lot of emotional manipulation, but eventually Margot agrees to share the venue with Jim. You're cordially invited to the wedding of Jenny and Oliver. You're also cordially invited to the wedding of Neve and Dixon. Movie review. Jim's daughter, Jenny, is his whole world. Ever since his wife, Jenny's mother, died, he's done everything he can to ensure Jenny's happiness. And what would make Jenny happy is to get married at the Palmetto house, a quaint inn on a private island where her parents got married. Jim isn't going to let Jenny down. He makes the call and books the whole island for June 1st. But he's not the only one making a call to the island. Margot doesn't like her family and they don't like her except for her baby sister, Neve, that is. Ever since they were little girls, Margot and Neve have had each other's backs. And Neve acts as a sort of peacemaker between Margot and the rest of the fam. So when Neve says she wants to get married at the Palmetto house, the place she and Margot spent countless summers with their beloved grandmother, Margot is on it. She makes the call and books the whole island for June 1st. Wait, that can't be right, can it? Unfortunately, due to the untimely death of the innkeeper, there was a bit of a clerical error, and the Palmetto house is double booked. The mistake might have been remedied sooner, but Jenny asked her sorority sister, a notorious party girl with an inhibiting fear of phone calls, to plan the wedding, and the young woman never thought to confirm the reservation. No worries. Jim is there to save his little girl's big day. It takes a little negotiating, not to mention a lot of emotional manipulation, but eventually Margot agrees to share the venue with Jim. You're cordially invited to the wedding of Jenny and Oliver. You're also cordially invited to the wedding of Neve and Dixon. Positive elements. At first glance, the relationship between Jim and Jenny is touching. Few father-daughter duos are as sweet and caring. However, as the film progresses, it becomes clear that Jenny and Jim have some serious problems. Jenny feels that her dad's happiness is dependent on her own. So, she frequently lies to him in order to spare his feelings. Similarly, Jim worries that if he shows any negative emotion, especially sadness, he'll make things harder for Jenny. As a result, neither of them has fully processed their grief from the passing of Jenny's mom. However, the chaos that ensues over the wedding weekend brings them together like never before. It's difficult, but they finally learn to be honest with each other. And they set new, healthy boundaries for their relationship that allow them to flourish. Unlike her three siblings, Margot was never interested in getting married or starting a family. She decided to pursue her career and has become a very successful TV producer. However, this created a bit of a wedge between her and her mother, namely because it forced Margot to move across the country. But rather than talk these issues through, Margot and her family opted to avoid each other instead. So, Margot feels unwanted and disliked. Her mom feels abandoned and disrespected. But as they come together for Neve's wedding, Margot and her mother both realize how much they've misjudged each other. They admit to their mistakes and stop avoiding each other, agreeing to make their mother-daughter relationship a priority since they do, in fact, love each other. Margot's also able to reconcile with her siblings, who simply miss having her around. They also come to her aid, even though they're upset with her for some unkind comments. Jim and Margot behave quite poorly toward each other after some unkind remarks, with both trying to ruin the other family's wedding. However, they eventually reconcile their differences, apologizing for their behaviors and trying to make things right.